The old Ford Ranger creaked and groaned as it rolled to a stop just outside the dealership showroom. The engine coughed one final protest before going quiet, a soft tick-tick-tick echoing beneath the hood. It was the kind of truck no one looked twice at. Dusty, battered, forgotten. The paint was chipped along the doors, the tailgate sagged slightly, and the driver's seat had been patched with duct tape so many times it looked like a quilt of silver scars. That was the point. The man behind the wheel didn't want to be noticed. Dressed in faded jeans, a canvas work jacket stained with sweat and time, and boots crusted in red Texas dirt, he looked like someone who just walked off a construction site. Welding, maybe. Roofing, possibly. A working man, through and through. But less than 12 hours ago, this very man had been in a glass-walled conference room across town, signing payroll checks with his name at the bottom. Checks for every single person who worked inside the building he now approached unnoticed. To them, he was just another potential customer, and that was exactly what he needed to be. The dealership stood just off a busy Amarillo road, a Chevrolet GMC hybrid, small enough to feel local, large enough to meet quotas. He'd bought it 5 years ago, rebranded it, rebuilt it. He had taken pride in that. Modernized the showroom, upgraded the service bay, raised wages, and tried to create a place where employees wanted to work, and where customers, regardless of who they were, would be treated with respect. But lately, there had been whispers, not loud ones, but quiet complaints that drifted in through the cracks. His assistant, Melinda, had brought them to him, 3 separate messages in the last 60 days, all subtle, all similar, all from Black or Latino customers, and all saying the same thing. They'd felt dismissed, ignored, spoken to with a tone that made them feel like intruders, not buyers. He'd wanted to believe it was a one-time thing, a misunderstanding, maybe a bad day from someone on the floor. But something inside him had tightened with each report, a whisper of doubt that had grown into a demand for answers. So now, here he was, walking into his own dealership with mud on his boots and grease under his fingernails. The man who signed their paychecks was now invisible by design. "Need help with something?" a voice called. Dry, flat, emotionless. He turned and saw a man in his mid-30s, thinning hair, clipboard tucked under one arm. No smile, no greeting, just a look. "Yeah," the CEO said casually, adjusting the brim of his cap. "Looking for a truck." "New or used?" "Used." The salesman shrugged, as if the conversation itself was optional. "They're all over there." He pointed toward a row of dusty trucks baking under the midday sun. No walkthrough, no handshake, no questions, no effort. The CEO nodded slightly and walked away, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to see what would happen next. As he made his way to the used lot, he caught sight of a young couple stepping out of a spotless black SUV. They looked like they'd just come from brunch, golf shirts, sunglasses, casual confidence. Before their feet had even touched the pavement, a second salesman was already jogging toward them, young, polished, with gel-slicked hair and teeth that seemed to glow under the sunlight. "Welcome in, y'all," he called with warmth. "Can I get you some water? Coffee? AC's nice and cold inside if y'all need a break." The CEO caught every word, and every unspoken message. He stopped beside a silver 2016 Sierra 1500. Clean, sharp lines, a small dent on the passenger door, the kind of truck that still had years left in it. The price tag read $24,300. He bent down to inspect the tires, noting the tread wear and making a mental checklist of questions he already knew how to ask. Behind him, the first salesman reappeared, hands still buried in his pockets. "That one's got some miles," he muttered. "But she runs all right." "How many miles?" "Little over 110. We probably got the record on file somewhere. You want me to ask someone?" The CEO straightened slowly. From where he stood, he could still hear the other couple laughing with the enthusiastic salesman inside. They hadn't even looked at a single vehicle yet. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like to see the maintenance record. Maybe take it for a test drive." The salesman sighed like it was a favor. "Sure, I'll get the keys." As he disappeared, the CEO pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, typed a line. Asterisk, asterisk, Silver Sierra 1500. Salesman didn't know mileage or records. Zero engagement. Asterisk, asterisk. This wasn't about being difficult. It was about being honest. He caught his own reflection in the truck's window. A man in his late 40s, beard flecked with gray, hands still bearing calluses from work he hadn't done in years. But the eyes? The eyes were sharp, alert. He remembered all too well what it felt like to be judged the second you walked into a store, like you had something to prove just for existing. That feeling never really leaves. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the showroom. The young couple was still being pampered, still being courted, but what came next for him would sting far deeper than anything he expected. 5 minutes later, the salesman returned, keys in one hand, a crumpled sheet of paper in the other. "Here's your record and the keys," he said, tone flat, expression bored. "Bring it back in 20. The CEO scanned the sheet. The log was barely filled out. 2 oil changes, a single tire rotation, 1 battery replacement. The dates didn't even match the odometer. Sloppy work. He folded the paper, slipped it into his back pocket, and gave a polite nod. "Thanks. Mind if I ask a few questions before I drive it?" The salesman looked at him like he'd just asked for a kidney. "Like what?" "Accident history, number of owners. You mentioned it runs all right." "That mean there's issues?" The salesman sighed, shifted on his heels. "It's been an fender bender, nothing major. As for owners, maybe 2, 3. Don't quote me, and no, nothing's wrong with it. I said it runs, didn't I?" The CEO forced a tight smile. "You did. Just figured I'd double check, since I'd be the one buying it." Another shrug. The man didn't even pretend to care. But before he turned to go, the CEO added one final question. Quiet, but loaded. "If I had a polo shirt and a lease application in my hand, you think you'd be talking to me any different?" The salesman paused, blinked. For a second, he looked unsure whether it was a joke or a challenge. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. The CEO stood there, keys in hand, watching him disappear into the building. Around him, the lot was still. The sun beat down. A truck horn sounded from the road beyond. But inside those walls, a truth had already made itself known. This was no misunderstanding. It was a pattern. He opened the driver's side door and slid into the Sierra. The seat creaked. The AC wheezed before spitting out lukewarm air. He adjusted the mirror and eased the truck out of its spot. As he drove around the block, his mind raced. He didn't want to believe this was what his business had become. But the complaints weren't wrong. Bias wasn't in the margins. It was right there in the bones of the place. And it was time to do something about it. The voice came from somewhere behind him, sharp, clear, and unshaken. "Why is he getting helped while I've been standing here for over 10 minutes? The room froze. Andre didn't turn immediately. He knew the weight those words carried. Not just the accusation, but the truth behind it. It wasn't said in anger, not even in frustration. It was said in disappointment. A simple, pointed question that didn't need to be shouted to demand attention. He turned slowly. There, near the door, stood a young black man in his early 20s. Faded hoodie, jeans, a folder clutched in his hands, likely documents, maybe a job application, maybe a financing pre-approval. His shoulders were square, his eyes steady. He wasn't there to cause a scene. He had simply waited his turn and been ignored. Andre looked at the man, then back at the salesman still holding the pen, hovering over a contract neither of them intended to complete. No one in the showroom moved. The polite smiles that had adorned their faces minutes ago had vanished. Even the buzz of small talk had stopped. A thick silence settled, as heavy as humidity before a storm. Andre finally spoke. Calm, low, controlled. "You want to talk about fairness?" he said, turning to the white man who had been first to make the complaint. Ask yourself how fair it is to judge a man based solely on his boots and his jacket. The man shifted uncomfortably. You didn't say anything out loud, Andre interrupted, but your silence said plenty. The salesman who had been assisting him, if you could call it that, fidgeted with his clipboard, suddenly very interested in a corner of the desk. This isn't just about one interaction, Andre continued. This is about what I've been hearing for months. Quiet complaints, stories whispered, not shouted, and I wanted to believe they weren't true. He looked around the showroom, at the faces watching him, some curious, some ashamed. The receptionist stared at her keyboard like it could rescue her. A few salesmen watched from behind half-closed doors. I wanted to believe that this place, my place, was better than that. The silence returned. Andre took a step toward the salesman. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I believed in building a business that took care of its customers, not just the ones with nice clothes and clean boots, all of them. I believed that if I hired good people, paid them fairly, gave them room to grow, they'd treat every person who walked through that door with respect. He paused. But what I saw today? His eyes narrowed. That wasn't bad service. That was failure. The finance manager, who had wandered close enough to hear, stepped forward awkwardly. Should I call HR? Andre held up a hand. No, I'll handle it. He turned to the salesman who'd treated him like a burden from the moment he walked in. You're done, Andre said simply. The man blinked. What? You're fired, effective immediately. Sir, wait, I didn't. Andre didn't flinch. You didn't think. That's the problem. Another beat of silence. He turned to the rest of the room, raising his voice just enough to carry. If any of you think your job is just to sell vehicles, you're wrong. Your job is to serve people, all people. The truck is the product, trust is the sale. He turned away from the desk, paused, then looked back. I came here today to see if those complaints had any truth to them. I didn't want to believe they did, but they weren't just true. They were worse than I expected. He crossed out his name on the contract, one heavy line. I won't be buying anything today, he said, voice steady, and I'm not finished making changes. The silence was broken by one of the customers still sitting in the corner, the same one who had been watching from afar. You think this makes you noble? The man scoffed. You're overreacting. You can't just fire someone because your feelings got hurt. Andre turned slowly, deliberately. I didn't fire him because of my feelings. I fired him because he couldn't be bothered to treat someone with respect. There's a difference. The man opened his mouth, but Andre didn't give him a chance. You want to know what it's like to be dismissed the second you walk through a door? To be asked how you're going to pay before you're even greeted? To watch someone with a different face get service while you're invisible? No, you don't. But I do. His tone was still calm, but now it carried steel. I've lived that. And today I saw it happening in my own business. He turned again, speaking to the entire room. This ends now. There was no applause, just understanding, and for the first time, accountability. From the far side of the showroom, a quiet voice broke the silence. Mr. Talbot? Andre turned. A young woman stood near the service counter. She looked hesitant but determined. Late 20s maybe, soft-spoken. She wore a collared shirt with the dealership's logo on the chest, and her dark hair was tied back in a neat bun. He didn't recognize her right away. She mostly worked in the back office. Melinda had mentioned her once or twice. It's Danica, she said gently, anticipating his question. Andre gave a small nod. Right, Danica. She took a cautious step forward, her voice steady but vulnerable. I've been here almost a year now, and I've seen things I didn't know how to talk about. He didn't interrupt her. He let her speak. I've seen how certain customers are treated differently, how the tone changes depending on who walks in the door. And when I tried to bring it up quietly, once, I was told to mind my pay grade, so I stopped. I stopped talking, but I never stopped seeing it. Her gaze swept the room. She wasn't just speaking to Andre anymore. She was speaking to all of them. I thought it would change. I thought someone higher up would eventually notice. But maybe we all thought someone else was going to say something. Andre drew in a slow breath. His face remained composed, but there was a shift in his posture, a softening, a recognition. I appreciate you saying it now, he said quietly. It needed to be said, Danica replied. He turned to the rest of the room. The staff that had watched silently from their desks now looked different, ashamed, uncertain, some avoiding eye contact entirely. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, Andre said. But I had to know, for myself. I had to see what happens when I'm not in a suit, when I'm not the CEO in the room. He turned back to the receptionist. You knew something was off too, didn't you? She looked down. Yes. Why didn't you say something? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't want to lose my job. Andre nodded slowly. I understand that, I do. But silence doesn't protect us, it only protects the problem. And the longer we let this slide, the harder it is to undo. He looked around again. We're not just rewriting policies after this, we're rewriting culture. We're rebuilding trust. One conversation, one interaction, one customer at a time. He returned to the desk where the partially filled contract still sat, the crossed-out signature a reminder of what he had almost let happen. He picked up the business card that had been handed to him earlier and held it up. This card says I have power, he said. But power means nothing if you don't use it to make things better. He glanced toward Danica. You want to help me with that? She blinked. Me? You've seen what's broken. That makes you valuable. I want someone inside this company who isn't afraid to speak up, someone with a voice and the courage to use it. Can you do that? Danica swallowed hard, then nodded. Yes, I can. Andre smiled. For the first time that day, it wasn't tight or forced. It was genuine. Good. Let's get started. He turned to the others. Mandatory meeting tomorrow morning. We'll be laying new ground rules, on paper and in how we show up. No one argued. Andre didn't linger. He walked toward the door again, the Texas sun pouring in through the glass like a spotlight. But before he left, his phone buzzed. A message from Melinda. Asterisk, asterisk. Everything okay? He typed back, asterisk, asterisk, not yet. But it will be asterisk, asterisk. The next morning, the dealership was unusually quiet. The usual clatter of keyboards and chatter between coworkers had been replaced by the kind of silence that only comes before a storm or a transformation. Everyone showed up to the mandatory meeting. No one was late. Some looked tense, some curious. Danica stood near the front, holding a folder of notes. Andre stood beside her, not at a podium or behind a desk, but at eye level with everyone else. I'm not here to scold, he began. I'm here to rebuild. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. You've all seen what happened yesterday. You know why this meeting matters. It's not about bad PR. It's not about one bad apple. It's about the culture we've allowed to take root here, and the fact that silence gave it permission to grow. He paused, then gestured toward Danica. She's going to help lead this change, and it starts today. Danica cleared her throat, her voice small at first but steady. We're implementing a new set of standards for customer interaction, measurable, accountable, and regularly reviewed. This isn't just policy, it's culture, and that means it lives in how we treat every person, every time. A few people nodded. One man raised a hand. What happens if someone refuses? Andre answered without hesitation. Then they're not part of this team. There were no further questions. Over the next few weeks, the dealership changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but noticeably. It started with eye contact, then greetings, then listening. The tone on the floor shifted. The hesitation that once lived behind the receptionist's smile started to disappear. People stood up straighter, not out of fear, but out of a renewed sense of purpose. Danica began holding weekly check-ins, offering space for feedback, not just about customer interactions, but about internal dynamics too. Small issues were addressed early. Praise was given publicly. Accountability became part of the everyday rhythm. Andre stayed visible. He didn't retreat back into his office tower downtown. He worked the floor a few times a week, asked questions, shook hands, not as a boss checking boxes, but as a man rebuilding something personal. And then, one afternoon, Ezekiel returned. He walked in through the glass doors in a clean button-down shirt, his folder replaced with car keys, and a quiet smile. He'd gotten the truck he needed, not because someone gave it to him, but because someone finally saw him. Andre was leaning against a display near the showroom when he spotted him. Ezekiel. Ezekiel grinned. "Truck's running great. I'm glad," Andre said. "You settling in okay?" "Better than okay. That interview I mentioned? Landed the job. Delivery routes, steady hours. Feels good." Andre nodded. "You deserve that." Ezekiel hesitated. "You know, what you did that day. You didn't have to." "I did," Andre said softly, "because I remember what it feels like to be invisible. And I don't ever want to build something that makes someone else feel that way." They stood there a moment, two men who'd grown up on opposite ends of different stories, now connected by a single day and a decision to speak up. "Thank you," Ezekiel said. "You earned it," Andre replied. Later that week, Andre walked out to the back lot alone. It had been a while since he visited this part of the property. Behind the rows of gleaming new models and shiny promotional banners, the back lot held trade-ins and old inventory waiting to be appraised or hauled away. There, tucked in the corner like an afterthought, was his old Ford Ranger, dustier than ever, windshield streaked, paint flaking just a little more than before. He walked up to it slowly, running his hand across the hood. The truck had gotten him through hard times. Long nights, cross-country moves. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol. He opened the door and slid behind the wheel. The seat groaned. The cabin smelled like old vinyl and stubbornness. He smiled. Turning the key, the engine sputtered, then roared to life. Still loud, still proud. Andre rested his hands on the wheel and let himself sit in the silence. Not the heavy silence of disappointment, but the quiet that comes when something feels whole again. In the end, he didn't need a press release or a ribbon cutting to fix the culture. He needed honesty. He needed discomfort. And he needed the courage to walk through his own front door without being recognized, to see it all for what it was. Sometimes change starts with a clipboard. Sometimes it starts with a crumpled hoodie standing at the door. And sometimes it starts with an old truck and the man who remembers where he came from. 6 months later, the dealership didn't just look different, it felt different. The walls had been repainted, yes, and the waiting area now had a fresh pot of coffee brewing every hour, and a shelf stacked with children's books and community flyers. But the most noticeable change, the people. Danica now had her own office. She'd been promoted to customer relations manager, a title she wore humbly but carried with quiet confidence. She still made time to walk the floor daily, checking in with customers, watching interactions like a hawk, and offering advice without judgment. Employees respected her not because of her title, but because she'd earned it. She spoke when others didn't, and now she helped others find that voice too. Andre watched her grow into the role with pride. Sometimes he caught her standing in the same spot where she had first spoken up, looking out across the showroom as if remembering what it took to get there. And then there was Ezekiel. The used truck he'd bought was still running strong, but he wasn't delivering anymore. He'd saved enough money to start something of his own, a mobile detailing business that serviced half the city. He even came by once a week to wash and wax the dealership's lot. One morning, while Ezekiel worked on a Silverado, Andre walked over with a paper bag and 2 coffees. "You're getting fast," Andre joked, handing him one of the cups. Ezekiel smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Comes with charging by the hour," Andre laughed. "Proud of you." "I wouldn't be here if you hadn't said something," Ezekiel replied, his expression serious. "No," Andre said. "You'd still be here. You just might have taken the long way." Ezekiel nodded, then turned back to his work. Andre stood there for a moment longer, watching the sunrise reflect off the hood. Inside, the dealership was busy. Customers chatted, phones rang, kids tugged at parents while employees, new and old, moved with purpose. The place had become more than a showroom. It was a space where people were treated like people. Andre stepped through the door and felt it. The weight that used to hang heavy in his chest was gone. In its place was something lighter. Hope, not the easy kind. Not the kind built on slogans or social media posts. The kind that came from real work, hard conversations, and the decision to show up again and again. He walked through the building, nodding to a new trainee as he passed. The young man stood tall, clipboard in hand, his smile wide and genuine. That was the future, and for the first time in a long time, Andre didn't just believe in it. He saw it unfolding right in front of him, one interaction at a time, one promise kept, one old truck that had started it all.